Hey folks, it's Julian of the Lafayette Trail. I hope you're doing well. Today I'm at the Washington Navy Yard in the nation's capital. The Lafayette Trail is dedicating a new historic sign to commemorate Lafayette's visit to the Navy Yard on October the 15th, 1824. On that day, Lafayette was given an extensive tour of the naval station. Lafayette was a Revolutionary War hero. His service in the Army during the American Revolution was absolutely essential to American independence. But if one considers a more holistic approach to Lafayette's American life, one will find that his tour of the United States in 1824 also reconciled the Frenchman with other branches of the US Armed Forces, in our case, the Navy and the Marine Corps. Lafayette didn't serve with either of these two branches, and yet both have been able to forge a true affection for the Frenchman. So where does this affection come from, and which role did the tour of 1824 play into the birth of this institutional connection between Lafayette and the Department of the Navy? These are our questions for today. We've got some answers to figure out. So let us waste no time. Let us hit the trail. Let's follow the Frenchman. When Lafayette returned to the United States in 1824, he looked around and he asked himself, what can I do to help this country now? As the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the American Revolution was approaching, Lafayette became concerned that his past service with the Army during the American Revolution would make the patriotic ceremonies gravitate more toward the Army. And with the national interest in mind, and with perfect knowledge of what he represented as the nation's guest, the friend of George Washington, and the living embodiment of the American Revolution, he sought to reinforce the Revolutionary War connection of the Navy, something that he had not been able to do during the American Revolution. So simply put, Lafayette could not afford to leave the Navy in 1812 if he truly wanted to fulfill his function as a stabilizing presence. One of the ways the Frenchman was able to do that was by visiting many naval stations around the country, such as the ones in Kittery, Maine, Charlestown, Massachusetts, Brooklyn, New York, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., and Portsmouth, Virginia. Captain Burns, it's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for having us at the Washington Navy Yard. You are the commanding officer of the Washington Navy Yard, and I just want to thank you, number one, for allowing the Lafayette Trail to commemorate Lafayette's visit in 1824 here to the Navy Yard. And I have a general question for you. You are the first Navy site in the entire country to host one of our signs. Do you have any specific feelings that you have about the fact of being the first?
I am more than honored, very humbled to be the first Navy installation to receive a Lafayette Trail marker. I think it's very appropriate, as any elementary school student of history would fully recognize that the marquee, without him, the American Revolution wouldn't have gotten very far. One, two, three.
Lafayette visited the Washington Navy Yard on October the 15th, 1824, and as commanding officer, Captain Burns, what does that mean for you that the Frenchman came to see the Navy Yard here on that day?
I think the fact that he visited here before his final departure back home to France is indicative of the value he placed then on the United States Navy. Lafayette, his Navy, French Navy, if it weren't for them, we wouldn't even be standing here.
Lafayette visited the Washington Navy Yard on October the 15th, 1824. He was received by Commodore Thomas Stingy and by the Marines. Commodore Thomas Stingy had been commandant of the Navy Yard for over 20 years. Commodore Tingy is a big name of the United States Navy. He's got a building named after him. He's got a street named after him. And so it's very interesting that you look at newspapers in 1824, you see his name, but you don't really realize how much of an impact he has had and how much he has penetrated the memory of the Navy, because he is literally everywhere. Lafayette was first escorted to the wharf to see the USS Potomac. From there, he was taken to the ship housing and eventually to the armory, where he reunited with a Revolutionary War veteran that had fought with him at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. His last stop on that day to the Navy Yard was the house of Commodore Thomas Tingy, where refreshments had been served in presence of Secretary of State John Quincy Adams and Secretary of the Navy Samuel Southard. You can see the house of Commodore Tingy right behind me. While he was at the Navy Yard, Lafayette was also given a cane that was cut from a tree that grew near the tomb of George Washington. And on his way out, he also paid a short visit to Colonel Archibald Henderson, the Commandant of the Marine Corps. His home was located just a couple blocks north of the Navy Yard. So, remember, on October the 15th, 1824, Lafayette left the Navy Yard and he got to see the home of the Commandant to pay a visit to Colonel Archibald Henderson. Well, that house is right behind me, right here. Lafayette returned to the Washington Navy Yard almost a year later, on August the 2nd, 1825, to inspect the Brandywine, the frigate that would take him back to France at the end of his farewell tour. Lafayette was welcomed back at the Navy Yard gate by the Marines under the command of Captain Crabb and taken to the wharf to see the Brandywine. The Brandywine was a 44-gun frigate that was launched on June the 16th, 1825. That is just a day before the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill, and it was launched right here at the Washington Navy Yard. Gentlemen, nice to meet you.
How are you?
Doing well. Julien is here.
Gordon Calhoun.
Nice to meet you.
Mike Galloway.
Julien, nice to meet you. Gentlemen, how did Lafayette's visit inspire people in the Navy at that time?
They knew Lafayette, as we call him, a rock star today, that they wanted to be part of that. They even renamed a ship just for him. They were going to call this ship the Susquehanna. And so they're like, no, we got to rename it, do something special for him. And so the naming convention for frigates at that time was rivers. They have a Potomac, they have a Susquehanna River, runs out of Pennsylvania. And so they looked like Brandywine fits both bills. Brandywine's a river, runs through Wilmington, Delaware, and also that's where Lafayette was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine.
Lafayette was no fan of the name Brandywine. He was even reluctant at first to sail back to France on a ship with a name like that, because for him, Brandywine was an American defeat, and as such, it should not be celebrated. But for the United States, Brandywine was the beginning of the American affection for Lafayette. It was the moment when the young Frenchman put himself on the line and demonstrated for the first time his attachment to the idea that a nation born out of the American Revolution would become the single greatest chance at improving the human condition around the world. On September the 7th, 1825, Lafayette made his final departure from Washington, D.C. His final words to President John Quincy Adams were very emotional. The departure ceremony was carefully orchestrated to reflect proximity with the Navy in an environment full of Revolutionary War references. Lafayette got on a presidential barouche in front of the White House and, accompanied by Navy Secretary Samuel Southard, proceeded down Pennsylvania Avenue, making a right turn down 7th Street to Canna's Wharf, where he boarded the steamboat Mount Vernon. When the boat passed Greenleaf Point, the Arsenal and the Navy Yard fired a cannon salute to honor Lafayette. Then, the boat was off to Alexandria, past Fort Washington and George Washington's Mount Vernon. The party spent the night aboard the ship by an oyster bank, and the next day, on the 8th, the Mount Vernon finally got to the Brandywine that was anchored at the mouth of the Potomac River. After waiting out bad weather, the Brandywine set sail for France at 7 a.m. on September the 9th, 1825. The boat passed Cape Henry Lighthouse near Norfolk, Virginia around 2 p.m. and that was it. Lafayette had forever left the United States. He would never come back. By order of the president, the number of midshipmen to take Lafayette back to his homeland had been set to 24, a reference to the number of states then in existence, and coincidentally, the return trip lasted exactly 24 days. On October the 3rd, 1825, the Brandywine made it to the shoreline of France, near Le Havre. Lafayette left such an impact on the crew that crew members decided to start a subscription, what we might call today a fundraiser, to solidify their affection for the Frenchman. The subscription led to a gift that was announced to Lafayette in 1828. It was a gorgeous silver vase. The vase materialized the new affection between Lafayette and the Navy. But beyond that, its design was also indicative of Lafayette's success in reinforcing the Revolutionary War connection of the Navy. The vase had 4 sides to it. The main view featured an American eagle, 24 stars representing each of the 24 states then in existence, as well as the main inscription from the midshipmen of the Brandywine. On the opposite side was a rendering of Lafayette's visit to the tomb of George Washington on October 17, 1824 at Mount Vernon. To the left was a rendering of the arrival of the Brandywine in October of 1825 in Le Havre in France. And to the right was a depiction of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. And the vase still exists to this day. We know exactly where it is. You will find it in the Lafayette Salon in the Château de Volaure, in Lafayette's homeland in Auvergne, France, in the hands of Lafayette's descendants. But the vase did not always remain on French soil. In 1893, it traveled to Chicago, Illinois for the World's Fair, in which it occupied a prominent position in the Lafayette Room and truly acted as a living metaphor for the historical bonds of friendship that have united France and the United States since the signing of the Treaty of Alliance in 1778. For Lafayette, the best chance at improving the human condition was a successful American experiment. And in 1824, his priority remained to create additional protections around American independence. As the nation was celebrating a milestone in its history, Lafayette sought to reinforce the Revolutionary War connection with the Navy, and he used his own image as the nation's guest and the friend of George Washington to do that. His visits to the Washington Navy Yard, his trip across the Atlantic on board the Brandywine, and even the friendships that were created in the aftermath of the tour of 1824 truly demonstrated Lafayette's lasting affection for the United States and his desire to add one more personal contribution to help complete the picture of the American national defense. In the home of some of Lafayette's descendants to this day, a Navy artifact still occupies a prominent position to showcase America's friendship. So 1824, 24 states, 24 stars, a trip across the Atlantic in 24 days, 24 midshipmen, that's a lot of 24s. I'll have one more to add to the list. When I started the Lafayette Trail, I was 24 years old. That's it for us today. At the Washington Navy Yard, I want to thank you for following the Frenchman to the nation's capital. I will see you on the trail very soon. Thank you for watching. À bientôt.